I made a video last week talking about my favorite books of all time, but making a list like that is a lot of pressure. Like I said in that video, I could have replaced all of those books with other books and it would have been an equally valid list of some of my favorite books. So I want to zoom in a little bit more today and talk about some of my favorite books that I've read recently, and in fact my favorite books that I've read in this year. And I've actually tried to concentrate this list to mostly books that were published this year, or recently published books in general, because I've been reading a lot of recently published books and I've been having a really good time with it. So if you're looking for some recent publications, I've got some fiction, some non-fiction, all sorts in this, and I hope you enjoy. Alright, so first up on the list we have The Codebreaker by Walter Isaacson, and this is a biography about Jennifer Doudna. Jennifer Doudna is one of the scientists behind the invention of CRISPR. Now, CRISPR in a nutshell is a DNA editing tool. You might have heard of it. It's kind of launching this genomic revolution where certain diseases like sickle cell could potentially be cured by this technology. So it's a really powerful technology and there are a lot of big companies and big researchers doing amazing things with it. But it's also a really controversial technology. Obviously, altering genes could have some pretty dystopian outcomes if gone unchecked. And so I think Isaacson does a really good job exploring both Doudna's personal story and her development as a scientist and as a businesswoman, but also in exploring some of the controversies in this world, because it's a really controversial world. And I really recommend this book if you're into science and you want to learn a little bit more about this genomic revolution. As someone without a background in biology, I was able to follow along and learn a lot. The next book that I want to recommend is also a science book, a little bit of a different type of science book. It's The End of Everything by Katie Mack. Now, Katie Mack is a cosmologist and an amazing science communicator. So the book is looking at this crazy question of how will the universe end, and what are the different leading theories that astrophysicists and cosmologists have. So as such, this book is talking about theories of what will happen billions of years in the future, long after the sun expands and, engulfs the Earth. It's a really great read because what Mack is able to do is take these really complex theories about what might happen to our universe in billions of years and distill them down into something that someone without any training in physics like me, I took high school physics, can understand. And it's also, to me, just an interesting existential question, like how is the universe going to end and how does that influence our perception of right now and the things that we're doing and how it mattered. I think Mack does a good job exploring some of these questions throughout the book, but not getting too heavy. I think there's a certain playful air to the book that makes it a joy to read. Following up on the space theme, I have a fiction book, and it's Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Now, you might recognize Andy Weir from The Martian, which is another space-themed novel that I thought was exceptional, and the movie that was translated into obviously won a bunch of awards and was a great watch. I think Project Hail Mary is a more ambitious project than The Martian was. It goes to a grander scale of both the science involved, where The Martian was talking about science is relatively well understood. Hail Mary goes and kind of creates new science or pushes the boundaries of science. And I think science fiction that does this has to walk a really careful line that it doesn't get too unbelievable. And I think there are parts of Project Hail Mary that do cross that line for me, but in general, the illusion is not broken and I'm able to follow along and really believe what's happening, or at least create that kind of suspended disbelief, which is important, I think, when reading science fiction. More than that, the characters in the novel, I think, are incredibly human. They're very well written and relatable, and you cheer for the protagonists. So I had a really fun time reading this. I actually read it in one day because I couldn't put it down. I'm like that with certain science fiction. That's how I know if I'm really enjoying a book, if I'm up at 2, 3 a.m. finishing it. And that's exactly where I was with Project Hail Mary. So I really love the book, and I really recommend it. Alright, so the last book that I'll recommend that was actually published in 2021, there's a couple more books that I want to recommend that I just read this year that are recent publications, but the last book that is published in 2021 is Noise by Daniel Kahneman. Now, you might know Kahneman from Thinking Fast and Slow. I believe he won a Nobel Prize. Very esteemed thinker. And Noise is talking about this problem that we have in our judgment where we think about accuracy a lot, but we don't think about noise, where noise is kind of random fluctuation. Kahneman gives an example of a dartboard, right? Where if you're inaccurate, you might miss the center of the dartboard consistently. But even if you're accurate, you're throwing generally towards the center of the dartboard, there's gonna be noise. Sometimes you'll throw a little bit above, sometimes you'll throw a little bit below. And the question is, how does that noise affect our decisions? Because it turns out the magnitude of that noise, especially in professional and legal settings, can be really high. It can be very costly, both in terms of money, but also in terms of fairness. For example, judges have significant noise in the sentencing that they would have for equal crimes based on really random factors, like is it before lunch or after lunch, etc. And after identifying that noise, the question is, well, how do you reduce it? How do you create systems and patterns such that the influence of noise is minimized? So I think it's a really interesting book. It took me a while to get into it, but Kahneman is obviously brilliant, and the book is well written, and it's something that I had never really considered before in any depth. So I really appreciate books that make me think about a new problem. Alright, so this next book I got into, it was actually one of the first books that I read this year, because when the GameStop saga was going on in January, I saw this recommended online. It's called Black Edge. Black Edge is a book that is talking about Wall Street, and in particular corruption on Wall Street, and in particular corruption within one particular fund, SAC Capital, which is run by Stephen Cohen, who is a bit of a villain of the GameStop story. For me, I love reading stories about scandals on Wall Street and corruption on Wall Street. It's just, for some reason, incredibly fascinating to me. It's a world that I've never been a part of, but the magnitude of some of the things that are going on, you're talking about hundreds of millions and billions of dollars being traded, it's absurd. So the title Black Edge is essentially referring to inside information and trading on that inside information in order to obtain an edge over your competitors. The book itself is focused on this federal investigation into SAC Capital, for which they were ultimately found guilty and charged for this kind of insider trading scandal. But Cohen himself was actually never charged. So it's this really interesting look into how these kind of firms are set up to protect the people at the top and so on. So if you're into that world, this is a book that I really recommend. It's highly entertaining as well. The final book that I'll recommend to you today is called Acid Test, and this is a book that was given to me by a friend whom I've talked with a little bit about our mutual interest in the use of psychedelics to treat mental illness. That is, for individuals with PTSD or depression or anxiety, the administration of certain psychedelic substances such as MDMA, LSD, psilocybin in a controlled setting with a therapist has proven in early clinical trials to be really effective. So this book goes over a little bit of the history of that research, as well as following the accounts of individuals who have been personally touched by it. So for example, a soldier who came back from overseas with PTSD and who achieved great progress with MDMA treatment, as well as a therapist, a doctor, etc. So it follows these different threads of the story, a very complicated story, and does it in a really entertaining and engaging way. So if you're interested in learning more about that world, which I think is a really fascinating one, this is a great read. I'd now like to thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring courses for creative and curious individuals, just like you and me. Skillshare is specifically curated for learning, meaning there are no ads that will break up your flow of learning, and so you can really dive into whatever topic you want, because there are so many different topics that are covered in classes on Skillshare. This month I want to recommend to you Andy J. Pizza's course on finding your style. I think one of the hardest and one of the most intimidating things about trying to get into art is feeling like you don't have your own unique niche that you occupy. You look at all these other artists and they've all developed their own little style, and it can be really intimidating to feel like you're just copying what other people are doing. And so hearing these tips from such an accomplished creative as Andy, and hearing the reassurance as well in it, it's a really encouraging process, which I think is critical for any creative endeavor. Having encouragement from someone who's been there, it helps you stay that path and helps you develop those skills. So if you're interested in checking out Skillshare, the first 1,000 people that click the link in my description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare so that they can start exploring their creativity today. Awesome. So I hope that you enjoyed this list. These are some of the books that I've been reading recently that I've really enjoyed. I'd love to hear what you're reading recently that you've really enjoyed. I've been picking up a bunch of books on people's recommendations recently because I've been spending a fair bit of time streaming about books. And if you want to check out the stream, you can find a link in my description. I talk about it on my Instagram as well whenever I'm going live. So I'm actually going to be going live tonight on the day that I post this. So if you want to come by, ask some questions, talk about some books, I'll be there. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you got something out of it. Hope you're taking care of yourself out there. Hope you're not melting in this heat wave. Hope you're all taking care of yourselves, doing well. Feel free to like the video. Feel free to subscribe. I'm John Fish. I'll see you again soon. Peace.